You're listening to the Beyond Sundays podcast. Each week we talk to people from all over the world who share stories of God's faithfulness. Today we sit down with City Council member Lynn Beard to discuss faith and politics. As children of God, we've been given authority to influence our culture in the realm of government, as well as art, entertainment, business, education, family, and the media, all for the sake of the kingdom. But what about separation of church and state? Should faith influence politics? How do we love and honor those we disagree with morally, refrain from casting judgment, and still stand for truth passionately? Moreover, how do we as believers navigate disagreement with other fellow believers on those controversial issues? With elections right around the corner, this conversation feels so very timely. So let's get to it. Well, today on the podcast, I am so excited because I have my husband co-hosting with me today, Jeffrey Turner. Hello.
Hello.
I'm so excited that you're back and helping out with the podcast today.
I know you haven't asked me in a while. I don't know what I did. So.
You didn't do anything wrong. I also have with me today, I'm so honored to have Lynn Beard with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
We're so excited for you.
Thank you for the invite.
And you just told us something really cool about yourself, of something that you used to do. Can you tell the audience, the listeners, what you used to do back in the day? Because you have the coolest voice ever.
In another life, I was actually a DJ on the radio.
Wow.
Or mid-'90s, probably.
And how long
do you have
did
a location or radio station? Like, I wouldn't hate finding some of that.
None of them exist anymore. Maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
How long did you do that?
Just for a few years.
Was it really fun?
It was. I'm a music lover, so it was.
You do have a good. I've never thought about it, but you do have a good radio voice.
Really good
My
voice.
voice is a little bit annoying in my headphones right now, but yours is.
What's the saying? I have a great face for radio.
That's right. Great face for radio.
Well, I'm so excited for you to join us today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and maybe things you enjoy doing? Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm married to my wife, Melinda. We've been married about 13 and a half years. Blended family. All of our kids are in their mid to late 20s. They are all married and live. We have one in Norfolk, Virginia, one in Argyle, Fort Worth area, and then one in Seattle, Washington. So
wow, all spread out.
We're bi-coastal in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
And so no grandkids yet. Thankfully, hopefully they'll be closer when that happens.
That'll make
East
travel
and West
fun.
Coast. Yeah. And so I, for a job, I'm the general manager at Abilene Aero, which is the fixed-based operator at Abilene Regional Airport. Been there about 4 years, retired from the police department in 2018, October of 2018, was there 20 years. And as far as hobbies goes, things I like to do, like I said, I'm a music lover. I've got a great collection of vinyl at home.
Oh, nice.
I've got 4 or 5 guitars that I enjoy playing. Just for my 50th birthday, my wife let me finally go get she didn't let me, but we agreed to go to Dallas, and I got a really nice Gretsch 5622, so I'm pretty happy about that. Yeah.
You also take tremendous airplane photos, which is a really random thing to me, but it's there. If you ever just want to look at some beautiful photos,
Lynn's
got some cool
When
ones.
I was in my 20s, I really enjoyed photography, and I just kind of got away from it. And then when I retired from the police department in 2018, I'd wanted a really good camera for a long time, and so we got me a Nikon Z7, the mirrorless, the flagship mirrorless from Nikon, and so I really enjoy, especially long exposure storm photography. That's kind of my thing, lighting.
Wow.
And then aircraft. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some tremendous photos, so they're cool.
I'll have to go check that out. That sounds amazing.
You also, you've served here. You serve at Beltway in multiple ways.
Yeah.
Yes. I joined Beltway in, actually don't know the exact date, but I think it was 2007. Got involved in the men's ministry in about 2010, 2011 timeframe. Went to a couple of boot camps, became a fire team leader, and then was on the men's leadership team here for 7 or 8 years, something like that. And then in 2019, became an elder here at Beltway. So
you chose a great time to become an elder right before we
COVID.
dealt with COVID.
Yeah, there was no controversial decisions to be made.
Everything was normal and easy. Budgeting was easy. Big plans. All that was just super easy.
Yeah. And then last year, in 21, I ran and got elected to city council here in Abilene. So I sit on city council as well.
That's awesome. Well, that is the reason why you're on the podcast today.
Great.
So that we can talk about and just glean from you what it looks like to have both faith and politics. Mm-hmm. And those things can hold hands. Like, they're not completely separate.
Should hold hands, in my opinion.
They should. Yeah, absolutely. And so I'd love for you to share with us, like, maybe when did you sense that this was an interest of yours or a desire of yours to be involved in politics or in government?
Well, there's kind of two parts to that story. I've always been, I don't know if a fan of politics is the right characterization, but I was the guy that watched C-SPAN when I was in high school, and I hate to admit that publicly, but it's the truth.
I watch C-SPAN.
Do you?
Yeah.
That's nice. There's two of us.
That's why you are both in the room at the same time, because I did not.
Yeah. And so I was involved in government from a law enforcement perspective, for 20 years. And then as I went through the ranks there, I retired as lieutenant. So that brought me in a lot closer contact to a lot of city officials and budgets and all those kind of things. I enjoy doing that kind of work. And after I retired and was out a couple of years, and I found that I just really missed it. I missed being involved in how the city runs and the things that have to be done. And so I made the decision to run. I was fortunate enough to get elected, like I said, May of last year. But the second part of that is I was actually thinking about this answer on the way over here about kind of where a service mentality was instilled in me. And there's a story from when I was a kid. I was born in Oklahoma, moved here when I was 12. My father was a farmer and a rancher, and my mother was a nurse. And so I was about 6 probably, and I was outside in our backyard. We had a trampoline with no safety net. It was metal frame. There's nothing dangerous about it at all. And I noticed a fire down the road from our house. And it was about 3 or 4 blocks down, and it was just a grass fire. And so I went into the house and told my dad, and we knew those people that lived in that home. And so we went out into the garage and grabbed a bunch of my father's brand new saddle blankets that we had for some of our ranch horses, and went down there and essentially smothered the fire and ruined all these brand new saddle blankets doing it. And as a 6-year-old, you're wondering, well, why did you ruin all this nice stuff, And I still remember the conversation coming back, about how easily we can replace these saddle blankets and the danger to our neighbors. And that I can point to that moment as kind of a time when I knew that the legacy of our family was going to be a service-oriented legacy. Mm-hmm. My grandfather, my dad's dad, my paternal grandfather, was a Tulsa County commissioner, and then was president of the Board of Trustees for the Tulsa United Methodist Church. And then my grandmother became the first female Board of Trustees for the United Methodist Church in Tulsa, which is a big deal in the 70s.
Yeah.
And then my father was chairman of the Board of Trustees for the Stillwater United Methodist Church, and so I'm a third-generation church leader now.
Wow.
So that was a really sweet moment when the day I got ordained. It was, things kind of come full circle, for me. It was sweet.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Well, in the modern church, we're called to build influence in areas that spread across what they call the 7 areas of influence, or the 7 mountains, and those being areas in arts and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, and then, of course, religion. And in order for us to impart the kingdom and kingdom culture in those areas, we have to have people in those areas. Mm-hmm. And it is so essential for us as children of God those jobs are all very vital. They are important not only to our culture, but also for what the Lord is wanting to do as He is building His kingdom here on earth. Because it's not all fully here yet. It's here
right.
in part, but not in full. And when Jesus does come back, He's going to usher it all in. And we get to be co-creators. We're co-creators right now, but continue to be creators with Him and the new kingdom. And so I can imagine, because we all watch the news, that the realm of government and politics, it's dicey. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of tension.
So tell us your most controversial city council. No, I'm just kidding. But even this last season, like in our city, thinking about some of the stuff that's been thrown at school boards and city council, and just it feels like
navigating that's tough.
Yeah, everything feels real volatile.
Right.
And so I think what we've seen a lot from the church has been either be a part of the volatility.
Right.
And maybe sometimes be the ones lighting it on fire, or that there's that extreme. And then the other extreme is people running completely away from the whole political sector and removing ourselves from what I would consider as a blessing. We live in a democratic republic. Like that's a huge blessing. And it's just so fascinating to me to see how the church, and I think it's happened for a while, but it feels like this post-2020 world we live in, this post-COVID world that we live in, it feels like the church in politics feels like such a dicey game right now.
Yeah, that's a longer than a 30-minute answer.
Yeah, it is.
You know? So I don't know if we can do 4 segments of this, but so there's conflict inherent in our system of government.
Sure.
There just is. You know, I'm a little over a year. I'm a year on council in May. And so, closing in on a year and a half, essentially. And the nature of our system, where citizens can and should have the right to address elected officials, brings, rarely does someone show up at a council meeting because they're happy about something.
Yeah.
Right? They don't show up to, talk about how great this is or that is. It's usually something that they either is a perceived wrong or a real one. And so navigating that climate is pretty challenging at times, but I think as believers, we talk about how these two worlds should hold hands, is the modeling of behavior.
Right.
And Abilene, I think we're very fortunate in our city that a lot of the and I was in law enforcement back at the beginning of a lot of the race discussions and Ferguson, Missouri, and the aftermath of that and all those things, and we were fairly insulated from that here.
Yeah.
But the conflict that I think predates even the 2 recent controversial things on council were the Sanctuary City Ordinance and the library book stuff. Mm-hmm. But if you back up prior to that, where I think a lot of the polarization that began started about the time of the pandemic, and some will link it to the presidential election of 2020 and the Trump-Biden thing. Others link it to COVID. I think the truth's somewhere really in the middle. But at least from my own experience as a church leader and an elected official, and as a leader in the business that I'm in, all of us had to navigate really difficult decisions with limited information. Right at the early stages of the pandemic, we didn't really know what to expect.
Yeah,
and so a lot of us that the people that I am around and that I'm a part of making decisions with, we did everything we knew to do to listen for the voice of the Lord and do what He wanted us to do. And, especially as time went by, and I think any good leader has to have the courage to look back on the decisions that were made and analyze was that the right decision based on what I know now. It may have been the right decision based on what you knew at the time, and have the courage to change course. And I know we did that here at Beltway, with some of the COVID restrictions, but that was a season where no matter what we did, somebody was upset.
Yeah.
Right.
And so getting back to the point of modeling behavior, and we, in the controversy with regards to the Sanctuary City Ordinance and the library book issues, just take the library book issue for an example. There were legitimate issues. Mm-hmm. There really were, but I think, and I said this in the last meeting when we kind of landed the plane on what we were going to do about that situation. I told some of the folks that were involved in all the protesting about that was, we could have arrived at this place that we're at today without all the division and anger, had the leadership of the city been provided an opportunity to address the issue. And that's kind of where we've gotten to in politics, is this ambush style, and we do it to each other, and it never produces any, you may get to the right destination, but there's a cost that doesn't have to be paid along the way based on how we treat each other, right? And, in modern society, I kind of view it as with the speed of information and the speed at which it travels, people may, Pastor David has talked about this, that, knowing about something and doing something about it are not the same thing. And we have access to so much information. I think it has made us kind of, as a society, we're about a mile wide and we're about a foot deep.
Yeah.
And we don't, as we become more and more emotionally driven, it is a much more deliberate effort to really stop and kind of step back from the emotion of the moment and really think about what is the issue here and how are we going to solve the problem,
right,
in the midst of kind of you being screamed at all the time. And so you ask me what the Lord's doing in my life, and that's it. That's the season I think He has me in, is learning how to operate with an increased measure of grace while still standing on what I believe to be true. And that comes down to, how am I treating this, not only outwardly treating this people, but in my heart and in my mind, what am I thinking about them? Because we know what flows from the heart, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, for me, that's what's going on right now.
Well, I think in leadership, it's so important to model a culture of honor.
Yes.
And to do so regardless of, what issue it might be, or if there's a disagreement or not, or if you're, I was going to ask you about if there was something that came to mind as in situations that you've been in before where you have stood toe to toe with somebody, even on an issue, a singular issue. We're not going to go into the issue, but like, what do you do in those moments when it is heated and it could go one of two ways, but you are a representative of the people, and you're doing your best to represent the people, but you also, like you said earlier, want to stand on truth.
Right.
And so I'm curious, in those, first of all, I'm sure they've happened, but maybe you can go into that just a little bit and answer the question of, like, what do you do in that situation? What have you done in those kinds of situations before?
So that kind of ties into what I was talking about this season that the Lord's got me in. One of the things I tell, in my professional life, we're in the customer service business. Anybody that's in the customer service business knows you're going to encounter difficult customers at some point, right? It's just the nature of things. And one of the things I tell our employees is, when they're upset, they've had an interaction with a customer and that customer was rude or hateful or whatever, and the temptation in the flesh is to retaliate in kind back to that person. And what I tell our folks, and again, this is a process for me too, is the moment I do that, and the moment I sort of hit the ball back over the net and retaliate with unkind words or harshness or whatever, all I've done is cede control of my own thoughts and speech to that person. And Scripture tells us that we have the mind of Christ. We have the capability to take our thoughts captive. It's a deliberate effort at times, especially in those times where it's controversial and emotions are high. And if you're one of those people that's anything like me, where your mouth tends to overload your brain, at times,
I may know somebody like that. I may.
And so, going back to what I was saying about modeling behavior, Jesus did not react to people
That's right.
that way, right? He stood on truth. He didn't compromise his values. He didn't lower his standards. He didn't do any of those things. But he interacted with those people from a place of not just love, but from a place of being secure in who he was and whose he was.
That's right.
And I think, for me, navigating those situations is, I'm a very open believer. People know I'm an elder at this church, and people know I'm affiliated with Beltway, and that I'm a believer and all those things. And so, I'm not just representing Lynn,
Sure.
when I'm in those scenarios. And not just because I'm a leader. We as the body are representing the body. We are ambassadors for Christ, right? And if they see me interact, in a harsh way, how is that drawing anyone to Jesus? Recently the Pride Parade was downtown, right? And there were believers, and I'm not saying they were or weren't, but I know what I saw, in some of the articles and the pictures that I saw were hateful signs and hateful speech directed at people that were marching. They accomplished nothing. Nothing. You can try to stand on truth and stand on righteousness and do it in the wrong way and do just as much damage.
Yeah, y'all are talking about, you talked about kind of culture of honor, and you're talking about behavior stuff. And I love politics. Lynn and I have talked a lot about it a lot. I love politics, and I think the most interesting thing to me over this last season has been like the very thought process of believers in the political realm. So I voted in every election since I turned 18, city elections, national elections. I love voting. On my wallet, I always have the I voted sticker from the previous election. So I've always loved politics. But it's been so fascinating to me how believers, some subset of believers, have navigated, like you're talking about, the Pride Parade or things that people disagree with them. And instead of going, well, even if you think that person is lost as lost can be, you want that person to know Jesus. And so even in the midst of disagreeing with them, which disagreements is okay, but even in the midst of disagreeing with them, like treating them horribly is going to push them further away from Jesus, which as a believer, my utmost priority is not as much as I love Taylor County, as much as I love the United States, my utmost priority is wanting that person to not be in hell. Like I want them to be in heaven. And so much of it is how we choose to navigate, like you talked about, behavior and how we disagree. Yeah. And I think that's been the most, I'll be raw, the most discouraging thing to me about this last season within the church. Forget all the rest of politics. I don't care. Within the church, how believers have navigated disagreements politically with each other.
Well, I can tell you that has been that issue right there. When I ran and was elected, I had a picture in my mind of what this was going to be like, right? We all do that when you start a new gig, right? Start a new job. And the thing that has caught me by surprise the most is the amount of disagreement I've had with fellow believers and their conduct in some of these controversial issues, right? And what I've learned throughout the course of this last, year and a half or so is, I can sit up there on the dais and I can lecture, and I'm a researcher, right? So when I sit down with when I get the council agenda for the next meeting, I sit down usually on the Saturday before the meeting, so 4 or 5 days before the meeting, and I read the whole thing. I read all the backup information. If there's ordinances that we're going to be enacting, I study the ordinances. I view those things through the lens of enforcement. How is somebody going to actually enforce this? Is this going to work? Is this not going to work? All that. And so I do my best to approach the meeting from an informed position, right? I think that's incumbent upon me as an elected official to understand the ramifications of the decisions that I'm making, right? And what I found is most of the time, people that come to the meeting to voice opposition, which is absolutely their right to do so, I would not have it any other way, either have done flawed research or none. Yeah. They haven't researched it from a place of, kind of separating themselves from how they feel about the issue and really looking at the issue and the real world implications of those things. And that has brought me into conflict with some believers that I've known for 20 years, long time, that I never imagined we would be at that place. And what my takeaway from it has been is, from a discouragement standpoint, you were talking about being discouraged. There was a season in there, especially kind of during the height of the disagreements over the structure of the sanctuary city ordinance, and I had my opinions about it, other people had opinions about it, all that kind of stuff. That's where a lot of that conflict came from early, and that started just within a couple of months of me getting elected, right? And so I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, you keep picking good times to take leadership role,
right? Yeah. But what I learned throughout that process for me is I know that the people that, and I'm just going to kind of be hypothetical about the positions on the sanctuary city ordinance, but there are people that are for it. There are people that are against it. There are people that are for part of it that don't like some of it. There's kind of this myriad of opinions about it. God made them just like he made me.
Yep.
And he loves them just as much as he loves me. And if we can't profess as believers to believe God is in control, and I think sometimes that phrase gets hijacked. It means, to some people, that means, well, we're just kind of hands off and God's in control. I don't think that's there's no evidence to me in the Bible that God calls believers to a place of passivity.
Yeah.
Right? I think he equips us to handle things in the seasons and places that he has us in. But we have to be listening for those things. And his voice can get drowned out by the yelling and the screaming and the divisiveness and the anger, whereas everybody would just take a deep breath and really listen for what he wants in these situations. I think we obviously would end up with a better product in the end.
Yeah, and we would all be okay with each other.
And we would all be okay with each other,
Right.
And I don't think it's too late, frankly. I'm kind of an eternal optimist, but, we really do live, we say it all the time, Abilene's a special place, but I can tell you I've been throughout my career in law enforcement, I've seen the worst the city has to offer, no question about it, but I've also seen the best the city has to offer. And, all of the natural disasters from from 98 to 18, I was most of them. We would have really catastrophic events happen. I remember when I was the public information officer, and we were going through a really difficult case where one of our own officers had been murdered. And we were basically going on to 24-hour shifts. We were just going to work until the case was over, which was not uncommon for cases like that. And a lot of the citizens in town were asking, what can we do to help? And we basically said, look, we need food and water. We're going to run long shifts, long periods of time. We need resources here at the station that we can pull on when we get hungry or thirsty or whatever. And it took about 2 hours before I had to go back on TV and ask everybody to stop.
Please stop
bringing things.
Oh, wow.
Because we couldn't hold it all, right? There was so much so fast. And we've seen that time and time again. And, the two major floods that happened during my career, Snowmageddon, but again, I believe about the world, especially our country, that's really more the essence of who we are. That's just not who gets all the camera time and the mic time.
Yeah.
It's less entertaining.
I was in Houston after Hurricane Harvey for 6 days with answering the mutual aid request, and we took a team, 6 or 7 of us went down there for 6 or 7 days. And so I kind of got to witness the Cajun Navy in action, and it was a time where, the components of the government of the city of Houston were kind of in a state of paralysis. They were all flooded too, and there were so many people that they just didn't wait for the government to tell them to do anything. We saw it in Florida just last week. Here comes Jim Bob with the airboat, and he's pulling more people out of the, out of these flood zones. You're not
waiting for the Coast Guard, whoever's going picking people up.
And I think that's more the essence of who we are, and we tend to pay attention to the divisive issues and pay less attention to the issues that we all unify around. And to me, that's my takeaway from all that time doing that kind of work, and even now as an elected official and a church leader and all that, is there's so much good, that God has placed in us, and there's so many people that want to operate in that, and they just need the opportunity, And I think we as a body can cultivate that by really encouraging people. I talked about this at boot camp just last week. If you want to see God move, position yourself to see him move.
That's good.
Serve somewhere, and you'll see it. My wife and I have seen more miracles happen at the altar just being on the prayer team than I ever thought I'd ever see, But if we weren't on the prayer team, I wouldn't see him. And so that's mine.
I love, you said earlier, it was like when we remember that person who disagrees with me is a child of God, is made in God's image, just like I am. And I'm reading a book right now that David recommended, actually, called The Political Seduction of the Church by Dr. Michael Brown.
I'm reading that book too.
It's good.
Yep,
it's really
so
good
far.
and challenging. But he talks about the perspective, and he greatly encourages believers to be in the political realm.
Absolutely.
So he he unashamedly pushes that. But he says as believers, we enter into the political realm from a different kingdom, essentially. We are, as believers, we are children, son and daughters of the one who created everything into existence. That's our primary mode of operation. And we enter into the political arena, which is so divisive and so ugly often, but so necessary. And we enter into it I'm not gonna muddy my stuff. Like, I'm not gonna sully the gospel with my behavior. My primary thing is I'm a son of God, and that person over there needs Jesus or knows Jesus, and that's the perspective that I am going to enter into the political sphere with. And I love that. That's kind of what you were saying, is that when I keep in mind the big things, like and some of the political things are big things. I'm not even they're huge deals that we're dealing with as a country. The economy, immigration. I mean, these are big deals. But when we remember that person across from me is either knows Jesus and is going to spend eternity with me in heaven, and I'm going to have to be held account for how I treat this person, or doesn't know Jesus and I desperately want them to know Jesus, and they are made in His image just like I am. And when that can be our shift that we can make, you go into those fights so different. Because I don't want to do any. My goodness, as much as I love politics and arguing, two things that I love a lot. I never ever want to do something that's going to push somebody away from Jesus.
Right. And
you look at social media over this last 2.5 years of everything from the election to January 6th to COVID to vaccines to mass, like all the shutdowns, and you just look at that, and so often I'm going, man. You follow Jesus.
Yeah.
Those people that you're yelling at, you want them in heaven with you, not the opposite. Yeah, disagree with them. That's fine. You have whatever stance you want to have about vaccines and masks and shutdown. That's great. But we got to remember the primary, most important stuff. And I think that's where I think we've often gotten lost. So,
yeah, one of the things I think that is happening is the church is starting to wake up. I think there was a long period of time where the church was asleep. And because the church as a body is starting to wake up and really pay attention to things that are contrary to the gospel and offensive to God and things that we should be standing up against, I think a lot of what we encounter in terms of the divisiveness within the body, and I think this is, frankly, a scheme of the enemy, is to make us suspicious of one another, whereas if I approach or view this person, they may have a different solution or a different method to solving the problem, but they are just as bothered by whatever that offensive issue is as I am. Now, and I don't think, again, I'm an eternal optimist. I don't think it's too late. I think it is a good thing for the church to wake up. I mean, I think there's two primary things we can point to, and this is just, my own opinion, about why we seem to have gotten so far from God in our lives as a society is two things. One is the amount of comfort that we experience in our country, right? And then two is the church went to sleep, and we the separation of church and state. We can do a whole show on that, that's not what it says.
No,
right? I mean, that's not what
that is. Not the words that are there. It
just said, the Constitution just says there can't be a established religion, right? The state cannot establish an official religion, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but that doesn't mean that the church can't and should be involved in the political process. If we want to affect change, believers make up the largest voting bloc in the United States, right? Then we need to be paying attention to, and again, going back to that mile wide, foot deep, we as a body, I believe, have a responsibility to go a little bit deeper than that, than we have. And, when you're faced with a choice, just, between two candidates, or say it's a primary and you're faced with a choice of 4 or 5 candidates, whatever the scenario may be, take the time to figure out which one of these people is going to vote biblical values.
Yeah.
Because, there's people out there that'll say, oh, you shouldn't vote biblical values. It should, it has nothing to do with politics. And my response to that is simply, which one of my biblical values do you find to be offensive?
Yeah.
Is it honesty, integrity, peace, patience, the fruits of the Spirit? What is it that you don't believe belongs in government?
Which would you like less of in government?
Which one of those would you like less of in government? And of course, there's not really an answer to that.
Sure.
But I think it's our responsibility to realize that, reading one social media article that's one reporter's assessment of a debate somewhere does not form a accurate picture of who a candidate is. You have to do a little bit of digging.
Yeah.
And in a time where in the old, and again, we can get into another discussion about, how we tend to treat political figures as saviors, but that's not new either. Go back, I have a subscription to newspapers.com, and I read old newspapers again. Shouldn't say
All right, that
loud,
took it a step further than C-SPAN.
And, go back and read some of the things that were said about FDR.
Yeah.
He was treated like he was the savior of the world. So what's going on right now is not new. Mm-hmm. How we respond to it can be different than it has been in the past, and that's kind of the beauty of the grace of God is we can do it. We just have to make our minds up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that you said it's not too late.
It's not too late
because it's not. And the answer for believers is not to remove ourselves from the political realm.
Absolutely not.
If anything, it is to dive in deeper.
That's good.
But do it in the way that honors everyone around us, and not dishonoring in the midst of diving deeper. Because I think there are large groups of the church who've dove deeper. Now, they might have dove deeper in just surrounded themselves with whatever thoughts they were already having, so it becomes this self-fulfilling snowball. And so you got to dive deep and make sure that you know what you're voting for. But then when people disagree, we want to love that person just the same. I want that person in heaven.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and I think about Jesus too, and he was lots of people disagreed with him. Lots of people. You mentioned that earlier. He had a lot of conflict, but what he did is he walked in shalom. He walked in peace. And it is his kindness that leads us as believers into repentance. And I think it's just as true. It's our kindness that we extend to others that basically, I see a picture of like people's guards coming down. You know what I mean? Of just so often in our culture, we quickly put our guards up and our fences up. But when people are kind, it's different. It's different when there's kindness. It's different when there is love. And as ambassadors of the kingdom of God, we get to have that influence on this earth. And we get to choose whether that influence is kindness and love that we receive from the Father and from Jesus as Lord, or tension, dissension, hate, all of those things.
I think people confuse when people hear words like kindness and love, they equate that to meekness, and, the same Jesus that walked in that love and walked in that peace also turned over all the tables in the temple courts, right? Mm-hmm. The difference in that action and what we see so often today is when Jesus did that in the temple courts, it was a righteous anger going on, right?
I'm so glad you're going here.
Yeah, and not just an emotional reaction to something that happened that he didn't like or didn't agree with, right? And I use that as an example of don't confuse kindness with weakness
or
right?
passivity
or passivity,
like that,
right? It doesn't mean you can't be. Jesus was very fierce, and I think we as believers have I'm not saying it's easy, but we have the ability and the calling to do both.
It's good.
And so we can stand for truth, and we can stand passionately for truth and unrelenting for truth, and still honor the people that we disagree with.
It's good.
But in order to do that, you have to really have, I think, self-awareness is something that's getting lost, right? People don't spend much time thinking about what they think about. And what their sources of information are. You mentioned, people tend to gravitate toward sources of information that they agree with already.
Yeah.
Right. And that's true. Again, in any cable news outlet, it has a political bias now.
Yeah.
And
you mean there's no unbiased media, Lynn? That's what you're telling me?
It doesn't seem that way anymore, does it? But again, you can even in that scenario, people talk about the media. It's a very broad brush.
That's painting. I mean, it's a million mediums.
Like our local news outlets, for example. In all those years I was the PIO for the police department, I encountered just every single outlet we have and lots of new reporters, and I had great experiences with them. Some of them are still my friends.
Yeah.
But again, we have to be cautious, and we tend to do that, use those broad brushes and categorizations with large groups of people and professions.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's difficult to categorize the media that way, as a not a credible source. And I'm not saying there's not issues. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there are definitely political biases in the media, but that's why you don't rely on that as your source.
Yeah.
Our source is the Word, and who God says those people are, and what does God say about situations that we find ourselves in, and that's our calling to walk
good.
in.
And as we enter into, the next election, we're getting close to that.
Yeah, this podcast will drop November 1st, right? Tuesday, November 1st, and a week after that,
Week before the election.
a week after that is the election, and
Yeah.
and I will be there. I usually try. This is like, we've been real serious. Let me ask it. Are you an early voter guy, or are you a day of voter guy?
It just depends on what my schedule's like. I tend to like to early vote just because you can get in and out quicker. But there's also something special
See,
about
I
election
love
day.
voting day of.
There's something special
I
about
vote
election
early.
day. But I take off work the day after the election every year because I will sit. I'll sit up 2 or 3 screens on my iPad and my phone, and I'll have every news outlet going.
I do that.
And I really enjoy watching the maps they click on and go county by county and all the election analysis and all that kind of stuff.
Sarah knows that election day that we're going to have dinner, and those polls are starting to close
Yep.
at 7:30,
And
8
that's
o'clock.
it.
And
Yep.
you know what?
Yep. I go
You
to my
put the
home
children
office.
to bed.
Yeah.
I'm
He's
done.
gone.
Yeah.
He's gone.
Yep. Yep.
Give me that more
Yep.
than
Melinda does the
more
same
than
thing.
most sports.
She just goes to bed. Leaves me in my home office, and I'll sit there with my headphones on, switching between outlets, and
Yep,
so.
it's fun.
That's awesome.
I love politics.
You both
too.
do. And I'm
We
so
do.
thankful that we have people that love it,
Yep.
that enjoy it, and that are influencing government who love Jesus. Like, I'm very thankful. I've lived in Abilene my whole life. I am so thankful for our town. I'm so thankful
too.
for our leadership and leaders in this town. We are a blessed city.
We are.
And we take care of one another.
We do.
But there's always room to grow.
Yep.
In the realm of loving others.
There is.
Like Jesus loves us. And so, Lynn, I want to thank you so much for
Appreciate
your
you
time
inviting
today.
me.
And if you could reiterate one thing that we chatted about today that would just really hit it home with our listeners, what one thing would you want to encourage them with today?
Only one?
Oh,
I have to limit to one?
if you want more, you're an
yeah.
elder. You can have
she
more.
can't. She can't mute you.
Yeah.
As we enter into, so by the time this airs, it'll be a week before the election. So we will be in full-blown, campaign commercials and ads and all the things that happen in the days and weeks that lead up to an election. And so my encouragement to everyone during the season would be to remember that even the people you disagree with are image bearers. And we have a responsibility and an obligation to the kingdom to treat those people as such. Disagree with them all you want. Don't vote for them. I'm not saying any of those things. But what we're really talking about here are internal heart issues. That's more about ourselves and how we look upon and
Right.
speak of other people. And so I would just encourage everybody to remember that. And I'm talking to myself too. I get pretty passionate about some of these issues. But we have to remember that God created them just like He created me.
That's a good word. Well, thank you again so much.
Thank you.
And thank
Appreciate you
Jeffrey.
very much.
Yeah, I love being here. Anytime I can talk to Lynn about politics is a win. So.
We need our own podcast.
And that
We'll
would
do like-
be
we'll do like
great.
Buck Sexton and Clay Travis. We do that.
I am
Yeah.
all for it. Let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Yep. That'd be great. Get all 7 people that would listen to
That's
it.
right.
Yeah.
But we would have a ball. It would be awesome.
We would. Yeah.
Well, there we go. Wow, wasn't that so good? I loved so much of what Lynn said. I think it's kind of hard to pick out one particular thing, but I think for me, I'll definitely be chewing on his statement about not confusing kindness with weakness or passivity. Because it's possible to stand for truth and to do so passionately while still honoring others. And you don't need me to tell you that the media or social media tends to paint our society in all shades of hate, anger, and discord, especially in the election season. So it may seem like our society has just gone so far away from God, too far away from God. But y'all, it's not too late. Jesus has yet to return. There is more work to be done, and the church can and should be involved in our government, and it is. There are people out there who want to bring the kingdom to our government and to continue to do so. But we as the body of Christ, have a responsibility to go deeper. So here's your reminder. Do your research. Research the candidates and the policies and topics, and go out and vote. It's not too late. Thanks so much for listening to the Beyond Sundays podcast. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss an episode, because we have a new one each week. We hope you guys have a wonderful day. Be blessed, and remember, God is moving. He is moving in our nation, in our cities, and He's moving in your life too. Beyond Sundays.